Anytime we strive, whether out of fear or desire for something, we take ourselves out of the present and we uncenter ourselves, we uproot ourselves. And from that point on, whatever we do is going to be an expression of a self-serving ego. This is Tao Te Ching, chapter 13. I'm going to read two versions of it and we'll break it down. This is Stephen Mitchell's interpretation. It reads, "Success is as dangerous as failure. Hope is as hollow as fear." What does it mean that success is as dangerous as failure? Whether you go up the ladder or down it, your position is shaky. When you stand with your 2 feet on the ground, you will always keep your balance. What does it mean that hope is as hollow as fear? Hope and fear are both phantoms that arise from thinking of the self. When we don't see the self as self, what do we have to fear? See the world as yourself. Have faith in the way things are. Love the world as yourself. Then you can care for all things. This is the same chapter translated by Taluan Soho, who was a Zen monk of the Rinzai sect. So you kind of get a subtly different perspective on the translation. In favor and disgrace, you're upset. Valuing big trouble is your body. What are favor and disgrace? Disgrace is considered lowly. Getting them, you're upset. Losing them, you're upset. What does it mean to say valuing big trouble is your body? The reason we have big trouble is because we have bodies. Had we no bodies, what trouble would there be? Therefore, if you respect using your body for the benefit of the world, then you can be trusted with the world. If you carefully use your body for the benefit of the world, then you can entrust it with the world. Ultimately, I think the overarching meaning of this chapter is non-striving, which is another way of interpreting wu wei, or wei wu wei, doing without doing. But this idea of striving is this idea of putting forth a willful effort to achieve some aim, and the aim takes up your attention and you give your energy and your time to the aim, and you give your attention much less, if at all, to any sort of aspect of life or yourself that is focused on nourishing and fulfilling yourself, right? In other words, you draw your attention away from that which may be more internally meaningful, ultimately, and more fulfilling, to something that is an external marker of success or something that is desired outside yourself, or simply a result that you may want and you may believe is fulfilling to you. But in striving for it, you lose sight of what you need now. When it says success and failure, hope and fear, these things both represent upward and downward movement, right? That's the analogy of the ladder, right? This is upward and downward movement in your circumstances. And both end up being equally disturbing to your peace of mind. Because, the line about going up and down a ladder and keeping both feet on the ground, it means that when you engage in the pursuit of some kind of higher status or external gain, that you are full of the hope that you'll get what you want, the fear that you won't, or gaining it, now you're afraid you're going to lose it, losing it, now you're full of the feeling of disappointment, and then the desire to gain it again, and you end up in this constant dance of tension and anxiety and fear and desire, and that takes you out of the present moment. It takes you out of balance, and it takes you away from what's happening now and what you need now. And so When your perspective is focused on gaining success or worried over failing, or when your perspective is focused on something you hope for in the future, or maybe fear might happen in the future, you lose perspective on the present, and you lose perspective on your own internal workings. So you're both externally oriented, and you are oriented toward the future versus attending to the present. There's no space there for appreciation of where you are. There's no space there for experiencing what's happening now. And so even if you gain what you were looking for, what's the point? Instead, remain content with the fulfillment of your simple needs. This is very similar to the earlier chapter where it said, hold to the center, or focus on your center, or focus within. Same kind of concept. In our Tai Chi practice, we would say return to Wu Ji. Very often, and this is probably more obvious in partner practice like push hands, where we're either focused on getting the other person success or not letting them get us failure. And that externalized focus causes us to lose attention on our own balance, on our own equilibrium. And then in striving to unbalance the other person, we unbalance ourselves. Likewise, if you are so worried that the other person's going to get you, it becomes kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. I mean, because you're trying to either run away and avoid everything they're doing, and again, you lose sight of your own balance. So that everything you're doing is no longer in relationship to your equanimity and equilibrium, to your mental and physical balance. Now it's only in relationship to what you perceive is happening on the outside, and not even what's happening, but what you think might happen. Win or lose, we're still not in a stable position. I mean, so you can apply this to yourself just as easily physically into the physical practice as you can in the more abstract aspects of life experience and sort of internal psychological balance. So you're out of the present and you're out of yourself. Those are the two things we want to be in. We want to be, in terms of our consciousness and awareness, in ourselves and in the present moment. It doesn't mean that we ignore the way that things that are happening now, what they may lead to in the future. Of course, it's almost impossible to do that. If you're attending to the present, then what you're seeing is a current that will lead to a particular future. But you're not focused on the future to the sacrifice of focus on the present. You're not focused on what the other person may do or what you may do to them, to the sacrifice of your focus on your own internal balance. It starts there. Now, even talking about solo practice, let's say you're doing the form. You're not so focused on the position of your limbs and where you're facing and all the external aspects of the form that you lose sight of your internal equilibrium. This is what we were talking about on Monday, if you were here. And I was talking about, okay, as the right arm and right leg are coming up and pounding mortar, what you're focused on, right, is still the same stuff. Bai Hui is up and you're sinking down, and it's the sinking and rotation of the force moving through the body that actually floats the arm and leg up. But if instead you focus on just lifting your arm and leg, you create all this tension around that external shape that you're trying to achieve success, and then you throw yourself off balance because you didn't start from an internal focus on what was going on in your balance. So the positions should grow out of the condition or requirements for your internal balance and equilibrium, not the other way around. Because if you try to get the position and then find balance, you're not going to. Just like in push hands, if you wait until you're trying to get the person or the person's almost getting you to start thinking about Wu Ji, it's too late. Don't seek fulfillment from the world, right? Don't seek fulfillment from some kind of external set of circumstances. You have everything you need inside. And actually, that's where the meaning and fulfillment and all of the stuff that you find in the world actually comes from. It comes from within you. It doesn't come from what's going on the outside. The line about hope and fear being phantoms that arise from thinking of the self, I interpret this to mean something like thinking of yourself in a narrative manner within the story of your circumstances, right? And so this has a lot to do with the way that we take on mantles. I am a mother, I am a father, a sister, a brother. I am whatever my occupation is. I am whatever my past has been, a student or a teacher or whatever. And all of these things are not you. That is a persona. And there's multiple facets of your persona. And a lot of those times those even come with physical representations or expressions and posture and so forth. And none of that is authentically you, okay? Those things could all go away and you would still be you. You could, on some level and to some degree, let's imagine, as has been done in many, fantasy and sci-fi stories, take your consciousness and put it in a different body and you would still be you, right? At least to a large degree. So there's something essentially you that isn't any of those things. The idea of hope and fear are phantoms produced by thinking of the self. In this case, self is meant as your ideas about yourself or the way you imagine yourself as perceived by others, or the way you imagine yourself, in a manner of speaking, a character in a set of circumstances and what that character wants to achieve. What am I doing? And what am I supposed to be at this point and in this moment? And then striving to be that, and then getting upset when you don't fit the idea that you think you're supposed to, or when somebody doesn't perceive you the way you want to be perceived, or hope that you will be perceived, right? All of this stuff is kind of illusory. And it's imposed upon ourselves. And this is, in our physical practice, tantamount to when I'm saying don't hold shape. Don't, through tension, create a shape with your body. That is not a true expression of your acquisition of Wu Ji. What's more authentic is when you start to release all that tension and align it and find the natural pathways through your body for force to be all balanced between gravity and ground and your structure and all of that and whatever your intention is. But we can fool ourselves by trying to make a shape, and then out of that striving we have all this tension, and then our shoulders get tired and painful and our knees hurt or something like that because we're just trying to create an impression. This is the idea of, well, the form ultimately should come from the inside out. And it should be an expression of the integration between whatever the intent of the motion or posture is and your Wu Ji, the equilibrium of the forces within your body. And then when you're moving your Tai Chi, the way that equilibrium is maintained through the dynamic exchange of yin and yang. And that becomes the way the form moves, and that becomes the way the postures shape. But we lose sight of this very easily and very quickly, especially when we haven't worked that out well in a particular movement or posture. And so we'll usually default to some kind of external shape, some kind of external idea or image that we're trying to represent as opposed to an internal process. So that's why we need to practice stillness. That's why we need to do the same movements over and over again as we attend inward. When you realize that a persona is not yourself, right, then you no longer need to act in order to keep up appearances, because that's not the goal anymore. So you can let go of that and detach from anything that does not truly nourish you or serve your fulfillment. We've kind of described what that means within the physical practice, but of course this principle applies in everything. That's, to me, what it means when it says, when we don't see the self as self, what do we have to fear? Because we're not striving for anything in particular. What we're doing instead is we are looking within and attending to what is needed and letting whatever happens be a process in the direction of fulfilling that need toward balance, towards contentment, mental, emotional balance with your circumstances, with whatever's going on around you. There's a certain level of acceptance of what is. Not necessarily a celebration and not necessarily a passive absence of intention to move in any particular direction. For example, you might be working towards improving a certain set of circumstances, and there's nothing wrong with that. But ultimately that improvement, what it really is, should come from and attending to what brings more balance to you internally, not to some external idea of improvement that is arbitrary and based on something that isn't felt or experienced, but imposed from some kind of idea. So you let go, And then you can change in accordance with what is needed to restore or maintain your balance. You're willing to adapt now because you're not holding on so tightly to the idea of what was going to equal success or what you hoped for or what you feared. And so the last lines, I think, point out that one who is caught up in the external pursuit of status of any kind, whether that status be a beautiful looking form posture, a higher position in your job, or the person of authority in a certain social group, whatever that status may be. Somebody who is caught up in that, who is really, whether consciously or more likely unconsciously, trying to serve their kind of ego persona, is not fit to care for the world, is not fit to be in charge of anything. Because in the end, their focus is going to be on what's in it for me. One, however, who is not acting to serve that ego persona, and this exists on many levels. It's not just sort of the big obvious ways that somebody's always out to self-aggrandize, but there are little tiny ways we all do that. And there's little tiny moments in our lives where we can catch ourselves doing that. So it's not like, oh, that egotistical person over there. No, we all have this tendency on some level. This is, to me, when we go deeper and deeper and finer, well, that's where the refinement happens. And no matter what level you're at, no matter how much refinement you've achieved, there's always more. Don't worry about comparing yourself to anybody else, because that's not going to lead you to balance either. So one who does not serve their ego persona, who's not striving for some kind of external status or result, who does not care about that, but guards and nourishes their own equanimity. One who has no desire for elevated status is fit to be in charge because they don't want to be in charge. They're not in it for themselves. They're not trying to see what's in it for me, so they'll care for the world for its own sake, the same way they care for their body. Taluan Soho said, "To want to rule the world is to want to pamper this body. If you don't prize this body, you don't want to rule the world." And by that, he means serving your desires. If you're somebody who is out to get all the things that you can get, things and people and situations are all reduced to material for your self-aggrandizement, for your pleasure, for the fulfillment of your desires and your will and whatever it is you're after, then you are not the right person to be in the position that you're in. You have to let go of that. That exists in principle on, like I said, very fine levels when we want to seek those things out and let them go and then ask ourselves, well, what do I really need here? And in the end, when you do that, interestingly, it turns from self-serving often into what serves others. And you'll find that often in doing that, you end up serving yourself in a much truer way, in a way that truly nourishes the soul. It provides what you really need and brings you much more balance and fulfillment. So that's this chapter, chapter 13. I think it's really about recognizing that any time we strive, whether out of fear or desire for something, that we take ourselves out of the present and we uncenter ourselves, we uproot ourselves. And from that point on, whatever we do is going to be an expression of a self-serving ego, whether we're just trying to prevent that which we don't want or attain that which we do want. Those wants and fears are based upon a scale that is entirely out of balance and out of relationship with what is really needed to fulfill us and help us maintain what we want, which is a sense of equanimity and a sense of equilibrium. We want to feel in balance because it's really then that we're able to adapt to what happens and navigate our circumstances with a sense of balance and a kind of manifest grace that, rather than striving, allows things to happen in their own way. And even our own expressions of self come from some place that doesn't feel necessarily that we made it happen, but that it happens through us. And that's the way our Tai Chi should be practiced as well.